Look, thank you everyone for joining. This is the second part of our series, Buying Your First Warehouse. We're joined by Matt and Steve. My name's Soren Reichelt and I head up digital here at Tsimos. Before we get started, I just want to reiterate to everyone that please send through your questions and suggestions on the chat during this if there's anything that you'd like for us to answer. Or if there's any topics that you'd like for us to cover in this series. So we do plan out the weeks ahead, and if there's anything in particular that you'd like for us to talk about, certainly send those suggestions through to digital@Tsimos. We'll review that as a team and do some planning around that. So look, in terms of this series, so last week we really spoke about positioning yourself to buy. So that was more so talking about things like how you structure your investment, making sure that you make some good, prudent decisions up front in terms of how that ownership structure works and where that investment or asset sits. We also covered off things like working with your financial planners or advisors or accountants in just making sure that what is affordable and how you can structure things from accessing loans and bits and pieces in that as well. And then finally also talking a little bit about, I think, which we'll cover again today with Steve, which is a little bit about positioning yourself correctly to negotiate. Today's episode, though, is really about choosing the right property. So making sure that when you've got all that structure in place and you've got all these, all the financial measures and models in place as well, that you're making the right investment decisions. So let's kick into that topic today. So Steve, just to kick off, we're really talking about this, I guess, where we see a lot of buyers positioned thinking, leasing versus buying. We just want to run through this example here. Do you want to talk us through the example we were running through? So 250 square metre modern warehouse. Talk us through that leasing versus buying model.
Sure. The strongest part of the industrial market at the moment is certainly the small factory type building, and they've been selling very, very well over the last sort of 5 to 7 years. And it's really a result of people investing in property while at the same time putting their businesses into a building which they ultimately own, and building a portfolio of properties. And probably never has been a better time to borrow money and purchase property because rates are so low that purchasing is more affordable in a way than leasing is. And this example is sort of typical of a new modern 250 square metre industrial building with some office space, price around 800, stamp duty, legal fees, total cost of 824. You normally would be looking at around 30% deposit, which is 247 odd thousand, and an interest only loan of 576 odd. So that at a rate of 3.75%, which you can do better, but I'm just being sort of conservative, would be an interest only payment in the order of 21,000 a year, as opposed to the rental of that property, which would be say 28,000 a year. So there is a cash flow saving, but you're also investing in property, and you're investing in the future, and you're investing for your retirement. And that's the way a lot of people are thinking right now. And the banks and the financial institutions are very pro lending money to owner occupiers. And we're certainly seeing that. And most all developments that have been built of this type have sold very, very, very quickly. And in fact, many of them are prior to completion.
And obviously the barrier there, Steve, for a lot of business owners that are looking to be those owner occupiers is having access to that 30% deposit, or finding a way to fund that, which is really, I guess, the opportunity that happens for investors that may have access to that capital to then be able to lease out this property in the reverse, rather than leasing versus buying. Here, buying for investment, then leasing. That's the potential upside, is that annual difference. Well, that's right. And even if you've got, let's say you've got equity in your home and you want to use that equity to top up the deposit, if you like, rather than using cash, hard cash, you still, if you do the figures, you're still going to be probably cheaper than renting the property, but you're buying something which you ultimately will own, and as I say, investing in your future and your retirement.
And there's still more tax claimable incentives there to do it both ways. So obviously you can claim your rent that if you're renting, but also if you're buying and then renting it back off that that entity, then you can certainly claim all that on your tax as well. So, and obviously if it's a new warehouse, we'll get into this a bit later, but there's also that the what am I saying? The
depreciation.
Depreciation, sorry.
That's a massive saving in your tax bill over a period of 10 or 20 years. So a lot of advantages in owning your own warehouse, and as I say, that's a very strong sector of the industrial property market.
Which is why we've seen such fantastic demand in that space, even through COVID, right? And low stock levels, people are snapping things up as quickly as possible, which is just prudent to the numbers, I guess, or proven to the numbers that exist in that as well. So I guess
that's right, Soren. And also, if you're looking to buy, and then you're doing it for now. So if you're also then doing it for later. So you're buying it for your business, you're saving money, you're also buying your own asset and putting money and your own fit outs into your own asset. So that's got a lot of depreciation costs associated with it. And
absolutely. And obviously that demand is driving up the prices, as we've seen or we spoke about in the previous webinars as well. In that space. So look, I guess let's say we're out there at the moment. We've managed to structure ourselves correctly. We've managed to access the capital that we need. However, we've done that in terms of that deposit. I mean, what are those sort of 3 top location traits to look for when we're searching online? I just think of it this way, right? I go to realcommercial.com.au, I type in a location. What are the things that I'm really looking for out of that map? We've listed a few here, but what proximity to freeways and transport, I guess, why is that important?
Look, I think it's certainly, if you are looking to buy, you want to have easy access to those freeways and transport for your couriers and your staff and wherever you want to go. If you're in a city and it's congested and there's bucket loads of cars and you've got 2 hours in traffic, obviously that's going to add to everyone's costs and probably frustration. But the way that things are going with all the Peninsula Link, the new freeways going through the Dingley bypass, it's providing a really good opportunity for a lot of people to have probably even a number of different suburbs, industrial precincts at the moment, where you can have really good access to all those freeways and transport.
And I think there's been a mass exodus from the fringe city for industrial properties over the last 25 or 30 years, and that's expanded areas like Moorabbin, Braeside, Hallam, further and even to the west, Laverton, Altona. So, and clearly logistics is important when you're in an industrial property, because
it costs a lot of money for logistics. And a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could spend an hour trying to get out of a street in Cremorne if you really, you don't have to try too hard, to be honest. Just try to get out onto the freeway. So I get what you're saying there is making sure you've got free access, not only for staff, but also goods travelling to and fro, and also your own deliveries right out to customers.
It's a multiplying effect. So if it's taking you less time to get to that property through traffic in the morning in peak hour, it's probably costing you less to have a warehouse rather than being in Cremorne, as an example, out in Braeside. There's a multiple flow-on effect there, from logistics to travel times to sitting in freeways. So it certainly adds up.
Absolutely. And that next point, Steve, so street configuration and access. I mean, when you're looking at some industrial properties, obviously making sure you've got good access for trucks and bits and pieces. What are you really looking for in that street configuration and access to?
Well, I think that's probably the main point you're making, and that is that you need to obviously have good access for good vehicular access. I mean, many people use containers now in terms of moving their product and receiving products. So that's important. Good wide streets. You don't find those sorts of things in the fringe areas of the city. You've got to go to the suburbs, and they're building the industrial streets wide. They're providing a lot of parking, great access, and that's important as well. I mean, look, buying an industrial property is no different to buying a car. You don't buy a car because it's red because you like red. You also consider things like fuel efficiency. You consider things like how much power it's got. What towing capacity, all those things that you put together when buying a car. So you've got to look at property in the same way. And what you're trying to do is buy something that's going to suit your business in terms of its location, in terms of its functionality, but also buy something that's going to appreciate in value. Its rental value is going to appreciate. So by the time you're ready to sort of put your feet up and retire, you've got an asset there that's grown in value and then you can easily let. And that's a really important consideration.
Yeah, it's really attractive whether the market's booming or, maybe the market might be in a different situation.
Of course, of course.
It's the most attractive it can be in that streetscape or that landscape.
And just to
as well.
touch on the access point there's two parts to that. Basically, obviously, you've got access into the street, access to the property, the driveways. Is it a front street facing property? Is it a rear factory and a bunch of factorettes? How high is the roller door? How wide's the roller door? Can the truck actually go in? Is it container height? So there are a number of things that you look at, not just the actual street. And if it is one of the older warehouses that have lower roof heights and lower roller doors, can I make it higher? Can it be adjusted? Can I make these good improvements to then help myself, but also help my future property investment?
And then that final one, which is an interesting one, I'm interested in your feedback on this, Matt and Steve. So, I mean, established and proven industrial precinct. So, I guess what's the detractor in that? Like, what's the reason that you need to look for those types of areas?
Well, I guess if you're doing your research on buying an industrial property, you want to go to an area where there's been a lot of development over the years, there's been a lot of sales, a lot of leasings, and how solid the market is in that particular location. I'm not going to compare one with another, but a proven and established industrial area or a growing industrial area, I think is sort of where you want to be looking at in terms of buying industrial property.
And Matt,
I think there's a few different considerations there as well in terms of sometimes the established, the older industrial areas. Take Moorabbin. It's very well a proven industry. It's a proven area. We can see a lot of sales. We understand the markets. But having said that, some of the areas can be quite congested with a lot of traffic. If you take Gatton Brayside, you might not get as much capital growth, but you've got very much in a proven area as well, but you've got a good access point. So pros and cons to all the different areas, but it really comes down to what is right for you and what you're looking to do with that property in future. Absolutely.
So I guess in that, so let's say we found that that property, it's ticking all the boxes, it's close to the freeways, it's got the right level of access, it's in a really established precinct, and we understand that short and long term this is going to fit to us. I mean, what tactics can we use as buyers to really negotiate the best deal, I guess, for all involved, because it's ultimately about everyone getting a win in that scenario. We've listed a couple here, Matt, but I guess, Steve, you spoke last week about unconditional offers being one of the strongest points for negotiation. What really drives that?
Well, I think that most vendors, would prefer to deal with a buyer who's an unconditional buyer, because a conditional contract is really I hope I'll sell it type contract. I hope the buyer goes ahead. But if you're negotiating on an unconditional basis, once this contract's signed, the vendor knows pretty much that it's sold, unless you default. But that's a rare occurrence anyway. So that's a very good position for a buyer to put themselves in, where they can say, okay, here's my offer. It's unconditional. I'll settle in 60 days, and away we go. It'll be met much more readily by a vendor than a conditional offer.
Especially in a market like we are at the moment, where it's quite competitive. It's a hot market. Everyone wants to know that they've got a sure thing sale going forward. They don't want to do all that work negotiation on a conditional contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you've said, Matt, as well, is that if an offer's being put forward at the moment in that market where there's a lot of demand and a low level of stock, you want to put your offer forward and say, I'm ready to go now. So make sure your structuring's right, your loans are in place, and put an offer in that's real. And the next part, this is an interesting one we were talking about earlier, which is being flexible on settlement terms. I mean, Matt, flexible on settlement terms for a potential owner occupier can be a very attractive offer on top of something that's unconditional, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you've got, take two scenarios, you've got a vacant property, obviously everyone wants their money as soon as possible. So, if you consider, in 30 days, 60 days, that can be a very good thing for that vendor, because they've got a vacant property, there's no money coming in. If that property is occupied by the tenant or that vendor itself, they may need time to move out of that property, to shift into a new property. Just because you offered your right price, the settlement terms have to work along with everyone else. So if you're willing to be flexible, sometimes that can be the one thing that can secure a deal over another one. So I think that's a very good point to raise.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, Steve, we'll talk about this, offer what it's worth in the market. I mean, it's always fun to, I guess, put an unconditional offer forward and just try and lowball, but realistically, that's not necessarily the best way negotiate the best deal, is it?
No, I think the best thing for any buyer to do is just do their market research, and of course we can help with that. We know a lot of the sales that are happening, but that information is freely available on the internet. So, do your market research, work out in your own mind what you believe the property is worth, and make an offer which is circa the market value, because to go in and offer a vendor 30 or 40% below what the market's telling you it's worth is not doing anybody any good, and it's wasting a lot of time. So do your research, and put in a reasonable offer. And as Matt was saying earlier, point number 2, if a vendor says, look, I'll accept your offer, but I want payment in 30 days, be prepared to do that, because you might save $10,000 or $20,000 on a purchase. So, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to summarize all of that, negotiating is all about, I guess, like you said, being in the right position to put forward something that's real. So unconditional offers, making sure that you have a bit of insight into the owner's situation. So whether that's fast or slow in terms of the settlement terms based on what their situation is, that's a good negotiation point. And then finally, just making sure that you're putting forward something that's not wasting everyone's time, because you can put a nose out of joint and then you're right out of the negotiation tactic there anyway, by being too low in that offer as well. So look, thank you guys so much for that. That's what we wanted to cover today. Now join us next week for the next webinar in the series, where we're actually talking about making the best long-term investment decision. As always, if there's any questions, please reach out to the team. Steve's contact details there as well. But we look forward to seeing you all again next week. We hope that's of value. And thanks again, Matt and Steve.
Before you go, guys, I just wanted to say next week we're going to do a couple of specific examples of some real property that's on the market, just to give you an example of what sort of properties are selling, and what's good, what's bad, what's attractive or unattractive. And I know I'm getting a bit off topic now, and it might be a topic for another day, but it's going to be interesting to see whether there's a spike in the market post this sort of shortish lockdown. And I'm going to be following that very closely.
Well, that'll be very interesting as well. We've just got a quick chat section here. Fabulous, short, sharp, to the point. Thank you so much, Janie, for that feedback. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks,
See you
Simon.
next time. Thanks, Simon.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.